The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Southern District Court, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge Richard Calloway adjusted his black robes and walked with measured steps to his bench, his face set in its usual stern expression. At 62 years old, with silver hair and cold blue eyes, he commanded respect and fear in equal measure. For 15 years, he had ruled this courtroom like a small kingdom, and few dared to challenge his authority. On this particular Monday morning, the courthouse buzzed with unusual energy. The case on the docket had attracted significant media attention. Johnson versus Westfield Police Department, a civil rights lawsuit alleging systematic discrimination and excessive force against black residents. The plaintiff's attorney was someone Judge Calloway had heard about but never faced in court, until today. Amara Johnson stepped through the heavy oak doors precisely 10 minutes early. At 34, she carried herself with quiet confidence that belied her relatively young age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her charcoal suit was impeccably pressed. She placed her worn leather briefcase on the table and began arranging her documents with methodical precision. "Quite the reputation you've built, Ms. Johnson," remarked Thomas Reed, the city's attorney, as he took his seat at the opposite table. "3 major civil rights victories in the last year alone." Amara smiled politely but said little. She had learned early in her career that her work should speak for itself. The daughter of a postal worker and a nurse from Atlanta, she had worked multiple jobs to put herself through Howard Law School, graduating at the top of her class. While her classmates chased high-paying corporate jobs, Amara chose a different path, dedicating herself to representing those who couldn't afford justice. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Calloway entered. "All rise," called the bailiff, and everyone stood. "Be seated," the judge said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of his Mississippi upbringing. He glanced down at the papers before him, then at Amara. Something flickered across his face, annoyance, perhaps, or something deeper. "Ms. Johnson, I see this is your first appearance in my courtroom." "Yes, Your Honor," Amara replied, maintaining eye contact. "We do things by the book here. I expect proper decorum and respect for this court's time. No grandstanding, no dramatic performances for the press. Is that understood?" "Of course, Your Honor. I'm here to present the facts and the law, nothing more." Judge Calloway nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. As the preliminary motions began, Amara quickly realized this would be unlike any case she had handled before. The judge interrupted her opening statements repeatedly, allowed the defense extensive latitude, and sustained objections before they were fully articulated. During the lunch recess, Amara sat alone on a bench outside the courthouse, reviewing her notes. A court clerk named Jason paused as he passed by. "Ms. Johnson, I just wanted to say—" "Well, don't let him rattle you," he said in a low voice. "Excuse me?" "Judge Calloway, he has a history with attorneys like you." "Attorneys like me?" Amara asked, though she understood perfectly what he meant. "Successful black women make him uncomfortable. Last year, when Angela Torres was here with that housing discrimination case, Jason stopped, noticing someone approaching. Just watch yourself. He plays favorites with certain attorneys in this district." As Amara returned to the courtroom that afternoon, she felt eyes following her. Something about this case had already gotten under Judge Calloway's skin. She straightened her shoulders and walked tall, sensing that what was unfolding was bigger than just one lawsuit. This was about who had power in the justice system, and who deserved to. Little did she know that by week's end, her confrontation with Judge Calloway would reach the highest office in the nation. 3 days into the trial, the pattern became clear to everyone in the courtroom. Judge Calloway made no effort to hide his irritation whenever Amara Johnson spoke. Each time she rose from her seat, his jaw tightened visibly. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit C, which shows the pattern of traffic stops in predominantly black neighborhoods compared to white neighborhoods," Amara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Ms. Johnson, we don't have all day for your charts and statistics," Judge Calloway replied, waving his hand dismissively. "Move on to something more substantial." The defense attorney, Thomas Reed, smirked. He had barely needed to object today. The judge was doing his work for him. Amara took a deep breath. "Your Honor, with all due respect, these statistics are the backbone of our case. They show clear evidence of—" "Ms. Johnson," the judge cut in, his voice rising. "I've made my ruling. Either move on, or I'll consider holding you in contempt." The spectators in the gallery exchanged glances. Among them sat Marcus Washington, a community organizer who had helped gather plaintiffs for the case. He shook his head slightly, having witnessed this scene many times before in Judge Calloway's courtroom. During the afternoon break, Amara stepped into the courthouse bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. The door opened, and a middle-aged black woman who worked as a court stenographer entered. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Denise. Been working here 12 years, she said, checking that they were alone. What he's doing isn't right, but it's not new. 3 years ago, a black female attorney tried a discrimination case here. Judge Calloway dismissed it before it even went to the jury." "I've heard rumors," Amara admitted, "but I've never seen a judge be so openly hostile." "It's worse than you know," Denise whispered. "There's talk that he's friends with the police chief and the mayor. They play golf together at the country club." When court resumed, Amara called her first witness, Officer James Wilson, a white police officer who had left the force after reporting misconduct. "Officer Wilson, can you tell the court what you observed during your time with the Westfield Police Department?" Amara asked. "I witnessed several instances where black drivers were stopped without cause," Wilson testified. "We had unofficial quotas in certain neighborhoods." Thomas Reed jumped to his feet. Objection. Hearsay and speculation. Sustained. Judge Calloway said immediately, without even considering the argument. "Your Honor," Amara countered, "this is direct testimony from someone who witnessed these events firsthand. It cannot be hearsay by definition." The judge's face flushed red. "Ms. Johnson, do not lecture me on the rules of evidence. The objection stands." As the day went on, Judge Calloway rejected nearly every piece of evidence Amara tried to introduce. The jury looked increasingly confused by his rulings. After court adjourned for the day, Jason, the clerk who had spoken to Amara earlier, slipped her a note. "Check county property records for 145 Lakeside Drive, Calloway's Lake House." That night, working from her small hotel room, Amara discovered something startling. The judge's luxury lake house had been purchased 4 years ago for significantly below market value. The seller? A corporation owned by the brother-in-law of the police chief. The next morning, Amara arrived early to find reporters gathered outside the courthouse. A local news station had run a story questioning Judge Calloway's impartiality in police misconduct cases. As she walked up the steps, Thomas Reed intercepted her. "You should drop this case, Johnson," he said quietly. "You're making powerful enemies." Amara kept walking, her case files clutched tightly against her chest. "I don't drop cases because of threats, Mr. Reed. And if the judge is clean, he has nothing to worry about." What she didn't say was that she had already emailed the property records to a friend at the Justice Department, just in case things got worse. Day 5 of the trial brought the moment Amara had been preparing for. The courthouse was packed, with people standing along the back wall. News of Judge Calloway's questionable property deal had spread through the community, drawing more attention to the case. Today's witness was Robert Miller, a retired police sergeant who had worked in the department for 30 years. He walked slowly to the stand, his weathered face solemn as he was sworn in. "Sergeant Miller, during your time with the Westfield Police Department, did you observe any patterns in how officers were instructed to patrol different neighborhoods?" Amara asked. Miller glanced nervously at Judge Calloway before answering. "Yes, ma'am. We had what they called high-attention zones, always in black neighborhoods. Officers who made more arrests in these areas got better assignments and overtime." Thomas Reed objected immediately, but Amara was ready. "Your Honor, this witness is testifying to policies he directly participated in as a supervisor. This is central to our case." To everyone's surprise, Judge Calloway overruled the objection. Amara continued carefully, building her questioning toward the critical point. "Sergeant Miller, were these policies ever documented officially?" "No, ma'am. They came as verbal instructions from above." "And who gave these instructions?" Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Chief Williams. But he said they were approved by the city's legal counsel and had judicial backing." The courtroom fell silent. Amara took a deep breath before asking her next question. "Was Judge Richard Calloway ever mentioned specifically in these conversations?" Objection. Thomas Reed shouted, jumping to his feet. This is outrageous speculation. Judge Calloway's face had turned a deep shade of red, sustained. Miss Johnson approached the bench immediately. As Amara walked forward, she could feel every eye in the courtroom on her. The judge leaned down, his voice a harsh whisper that the microphone barely caught. You are dangerously close to committing professional suicide, Ms. Johnson. That line of questioning stops now. Your Honor, I have evidence suggesting that you have had improper communications with the police department regarding these cases. If you have a personal interest in this matter, perhaps you should recuse yourself. The judge's eyes widened. That's it. You are held in contempt of court. His voice boomed through the room as he stood up. Bailiff, remove Ms. Johnson from my courtroom immediately. This case is suspended until a new attorney can be appointed. The bailiff, a large man named Officer Tanner, approached Amara reluctantly. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Marcus Washington stood up from his seat in protest, followed by several others. Your Honor, Amara said clearly, I'd like the record to show that I'm being removed after questioning the court's impartiality based on documented evidence. Get her out now, Judge Calloway shouted, pounding his gavel. As Officer Tanner took Amara's arm, she noticed Jason, the court clerk, slipping out the side door with his phone already to his ear. The young man's face was determined as he disappeared into the hallway. Amara gathered her papers calmly, despite the chaos erupting around her. Her clients were on their feet, demanding answers. Reporters were scribbling frantically in their notebooks. Ms. Johnson, Thomas Reed said quietly as she passed his table, you've just destroyed your career for nothing. Amara looked him directly in the eyes. No, Mr. Reed. If justice can be bought in this courthouse, then the problem isn't with my career. Officer Tanner led her toward the door, but moved slowly, giving her time to pack her briefcase. For what it's worth, he whispered, my brother lives in one of those high-attention zones. What you're doing matters. As they reached the doors, Amara looked back at the judge, who was still shouting for order. She had known this moment might come when she took the case. What she didn't know was that 200 miles away in Washington, D.C., a phone was already ringing with news that would change everything. Jason Peterson hurried down the marble hallway, his court clerk badge bouncing against his chest. Finding an empty conference room, he closed the door and pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He scrolled to a contact labeled Michelle W. and pressed call. Come on, pick up, he whispered, pacing the small room. 200 miles away in Washington, D.C., Michelle Washington was reviewing documents in her office at the White House. As deputy legal counsel to the president, her days were filled with meetings and briefings. When her phone rang, she almost ignored it until she saw Jason's name. Jason, this is unexpected, she answered. Michelle, it's happening again. Judge Calloway just removed Amara Johnson from court for questioning his connections to the police department. Michelle sat up straight. Amara Johnson, we were at Howard Law together. I know, that's why I called you. This is worse than the other cases. Amara found documents showing Calloway bought his lake house from the police chief's brother-in-law at half its value. On the other end of the line, Michelle began typing rapidly on her computer. Send me everything you have, now. Back at the courthouse, Amara stood in the hallway, surrounded by her distressed clients. What happens now? Asked Tanya Roberts, one of the plaintiffs who had been wrongfully arrested 3 times in the past year. I'm not giving up, Amara assured them. This removal is temporary. We can file for a new judge based on bias. As she spoke, Officer Tanner approached her again, looking uncomfortable. Ms. Johnson, Judge Calloway wants your files before you leave the building. He's claiming they contain court property. Amara clutched her briefcase tighter. These are attorney-client privileged documents. He has no right to them. He's sending court officers to collect them, Tanner warned. They're coming now. Thinking quickly, Amara handed a USB drive to Marcus Washington. Get this to Attorney James Wilson at the ACLU office downtown. It has copies of everything. Marcus nodded and slipped away just as 2 court officers rounded the corner. Meanwhile, Jason had returned to the courthouse and was frantically searching through digital archives in the clerk's office. His colleague, Denise, kept watch at the door. What exactly are you looking for? She whispered. Proof, Jason replied, downloading files onto a secure server. Judge Calloway has dismissed every civil rights case against the police department for the past 5 years. But I found something else. He's been assigned to these cases specifically, bypassing the random assignment process. Denise's eyes widened. Who's making those assignments? That's what I'm trying to find out. Jason's phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. Keep digging. DOJ wants evidence of pattern. Poe to U.S. been briefed. In Washington, Michelle was now in a secure conference room with the Attorney General and the White House Chief of Staff. On the table between them lay a thick file labeled Southern District Judicial Misconduct Investigation. We've been watching Judge Calloway for months, the Attorney General explained. Your friend's case just brought things to a head sooner than expected. Amara doesn't know about our investigation, Michelle said. She stumbled into this on her own. The Chief of Staff checked his watch. The President wants action today. This pattern of judicial misconduct aligns with our justice reform initiative. How quickly can we move? I can have DOJ agents at the courthouse within the hour, the Attorney General replied. Back at the courthouse, the two court officers had cornered Amara near the elevator. One reached for her briefcase. Judge's orders, ma'am. Hand over the files. Suddenly, Amara's phone rang. She answered it, looking directly at the officers. This is Amara Johnson. Ms. Johnson, this is Michelle Washington, Deputy White House Counsel. Please put me on speaker. Amara pressed the speaker button, confusion written across her face. This is an official notice that the Department of Justice is opening an investigation into judicial misconduct in the Southern District Court. All case files are now considered federal evidence. Anyone interfering with these documents will face obstruction charges. The court officers exchanged nervous glances and stepped back, just as the courthouse phone system began to ring throughout the building. The main phone at the clerk's desk rang with an unusual tone, one reserved for high-priority calls. The head clerk, Mrs. Rivera, who had worked at the courthouse for 25 years, picked it up with a curious expression. Southern District Court, how may I direct your call? She answered. Her eyes widened as she listened to the voice on the other end. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. She placed her hand over the receiver and turned to the bailiff. It's for Judge Calloway, from Washington. The courtroom had descended into chaos after Amara's removal. Judge Calloway was banging his gavel repeatedly, demanding order as reporters shouted questions and spectators protested. The bailiff pushed through the crowd and approached the bench. Your Honor, he said, leaning in close. There's an urgent call for you. From the White House. Judge Calloway froze mid-swing of his gavel. What did you say? The White House, sir. They're holding on line 1. The color drained from Judge Calloway's face. He quickly stood up. This court is in recess for 30 minutes, he announced, then hurried to his chambers. With shaking hands, he picked up his private line. This is Judge Richard Calloway. Judge Calloway, this is Andrew Phillips, White House Chief of Staff. I'm here with the Attorney General and Deputy White House Counsel Washington. In the hallway, Amara was still on her phone with Michelle when she saw Judge Calloway's door close. The two court officers who had tried to take her files now stood awkwardly nearby, unsure what to do. What exactly is happening, Michelle? Amara asked, still confused by this sudden turn of events. The short version? Your case broke open a federal investigation that's been building for months. Judge Calloway is one of several judges across 3 states suspected of taking bribes to dismiss civil rights cases. Amara sank into a nearby bench, stunned. So this goes beyond Westfield? Much beyond. The President has made judicial integrity a priority. When we connected your case to the larger pattern, well, things moved quickly. Inside his chambers, Judge Calloway gripped his desk for support as he listened to the Attorney General explain the situation. We have evidence of judicial misconduct spanning 5 years, Judge Calloway. Documented patterns of case dismissals, financial transactions with interested parties, and improper case assignments. This is ridiculous. Calloway sputtered. You can't just interrupt a court proceeding based on some wild accusations. Judge, the Chief of Staff's voice cut in. Federal agents are already en route to secure evidence. The President has personally authorized this intervention under the judicial misconduct statutes. Outside the courthouse, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the main entrance. Men and women in dark suits emerged, led by Special Agent Diana Chen from the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section. Back in the hallway, Jason approached Amara with a folder. "You should see this," he said, showing her documents revealing how Judge Calloway had been specifically assigned to civil rights cases through manipulation of the court's scheduling system. The courthouse doors opened, and Agent Chen entered with her team. She spotted Amara and walked directly toward her. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Special Agent Chen. We'd like to speak with you about your evidence against Judge Calloway." At that moment, Judge Calloway's chamber door flew open. He emerged, his face now bright red with rage instead of pallor. "This is my courthouse," he shouted at no one in particular. "You can't just—" He stopped abruptly when he saw the federal agents, their badges now visible. Agent Chen approached him calmly. "Judge Richard Calloway, I'm here to serve you with notice of a federal investigation into judicial misconduct. Please return to your chambers where we can discuss this privately." The gathered crowd watched in stunned silence as the once powerful judge seemed to physically shrink before their eyes. Amara stood tall, her briefcase still clutched tightly in her hand. "What happens to my client's case now?" she asked Agent Chen. "That's partly why we're here, Ms. Johnson," Agent Chen replied. "The White House wants to ensure justice is served, in more ways than one." The next morning, the small city of Westfield awoke to find its courthouse surrounded by news vans. Reporters stood in front of cameras, gesturing toward the historic building behind them. In a stunning development, federal agents yesterday took control of Judge Richard Calloway's courtroom and office, one reporter announced. Sources say the investigation relates to allegations of judicial corruption spanning several years. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Court employees whispered in corners as Agent Chen and her team methodically worked through files and computer records. They had set up a temporary command center in a conference room, with monitors displaying financial transactions and case histories. Judge Calloway sat alone in his chambers, the blinds drawn. His attorney, a nervous man named Harold Winters, had arrived an hour earlier. "Richard, this is serious," Winters said, pacing the room. "They have your financial records going back 7 years. They know about the lake house, the offshore account, everything." Judge Calloway stared blankly at the law degrees hanging on his wall. "They can't prove anything, it's all circumstantial." "They have witnesses, Richard. Former police officers, court clerks, even other judges who say you bragged about controlling outcomes in civil rights cases." A knock at the door interrupted them. Agent Chen entered without waiting for a response. "Judge Calloway, we need to discuss the Wilson testimony from yesterday's trial," she said, placing a transcript on his desk. "This matches perfectly with financial deposits made to your Cayman account 3 years ago." Across town, Amara sat with her clients in a crowded church basement. The community had gathered to hear about the dramatic events and what they meant for their case. "The Justice Department has asked that I continue representing you," Amara explained. "They're bringing in a federal judge to take over the case, someone with no connections to this district." Tanya Roberts raised her hand. "Does this mean we'll actually get justice now?" "It means we'll get a fair hearing," Amara replied cautiously. "But something bigger is happening too. They're reviewing every case Judge Calloway dismissed in the past 5 years. People who lost their cases might get a second chance." Marcus Washington stood up. "My brother lost his business because of a wrongful arrest 3 years ago. Judge Calloway threw out his lawsuit in 10 minutes. Could that case be reopened?" "Potentially, yes," Amara nodded. "The Justice Department is setting up a special review panel." Back at the courthouse, the investigation was expanding. Agent Chen's team had discovered a pattern that went beyond Judge Calloway. Evidence suggested that at least 2 other judges in neighboring districts were part of the same scheme. "It's like a network," she explained to her supervisor over a secure line. "They communicate through a private golf club. We found text messages coordinating how they'd rule on similar cases." By afternoon, Judge Calloway's name was trending on social media. Former defendants came forward with stories of unfair treatment in his courtroom, particularly those who were Black or Hispanic. Law professors were being interviewed about judicial misconduct and the systems meant to prevent it. At the White House, Michelle Washington briefed the president on the latest developments. "The corruption appears more widespread than we initially thought, Mr. President," The Attorney General is recommending we expand the investigation to the entire circuit. The president nodded gravely. This is exactly why we push for judicial reform. Make sure Ms. Johnson and her clients are protected. I don't want any retaliation against them. As evening fell, Agent Chen approached Jason and Denise, who had been helping the federal team navigate the court's filing system. We couldn't have moved this quickly without your assistance, she told them. The White House asked me to personally thank you for your courage. Denise smiled tiredly. I've watched Judge Calloway destroy too many lives. It was time someone stood up to him. Outside, the last news crew was packing up for the day. Their final report showed split-screen images, Judge Calloway being escorted to a car by federal agents, and Amara Johnson standing tall on the courthouse steps, surrounded by her grateful clients. The wheels of justice, so long stuck in place, had finally begun to turn. 3 weeks after the dramatic courthouse intervention, Amara Johnson sat in a different courtroom in the federal building downtown. The room was larger, brighter, and filled with even more people than before. Judge Eleanor Martinez, brought in from another district, presided over the proceedings with a calm, firm demeanor that inspired confidence. The court calls Amara Johnson to the stand, announced the clerk. Amara walked forward and took her oath. It felt strange to be a witness rather than an attorney, but the Judicial Conduct Committee had requested her testimony directly. From her seat, she could see her clients in the gallery, along with Jason, Denise, and dozens of other people whose lives had been affected by Judge Calloway. Thomas Reed, the former defense attorney, sat alone at his table, his face grim. His law firm had dropped him after evidence emerged that he had helped coordinate the dismissal of civil rights cases. Judge Calloway himself was notably absent, having been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the hearing. Ms. Johnson, began the lead investigator, please describe for the committee the pattern of behavior you observed in Judge Calloway's courtroom. Amara spoke clearly, describing not just her recent experience but the research she had done on his past cases. In the 5 years before my case, Judge Calloway dismissed 94% of civil rights claims brought by minority plaintiffs, compared to only 26% of similar cases brought by white plaintiffs. She submitted statistics, case transcripts, and testimony from other attorneys who had appeared before him. The committee members listened intently, taking detailed notes. Did you ever witness Judge Calloway make explicitly racist statements? One committee member asked. He was too careful for that, Amara replied. His bias showed in his actions, interrupting minority attorneys more frequently, imposing stricter evidence standards, rushing through testimony from minority witnesses. As Amara continued her testimony, more witnesses waited their turn. Former defendants who had been denied justice sat beside attorneys who had fought unsuccessfully against Calloway's bias for years. Each had a story that, when pieced together, revealed a troubling pattern. During a break in the proceedings, Michelle Washington approached Amara in the hallway. The president is following this case closely, she said, her voice low. Your work has sparked something bigger than you know. There's talk of legislation to strengthen judicial oversight nationally. Amara nodded, still processing how far things had come. I just wanted justice for my clients. I never expected all of this. Sometimes justice needs a catalyst, Michelle replied. When the hearing resumed, a witness Amara had never expected took the stand. Judge Samuel Richardson from a neighboring district. Judge Calloway approached me 5 years ago, Richardson testified. He suggested we could help each other with certain types of cases. When I refused, cases were reassigned away from me. My caseload dropped by half within 3 months. The committee members exchanged concerned glances. This testimony suggested the corruption extended into court administration. By late afternoon, it was Officer Wilson's turn to testify again, this time with the protection of immunity. Judge Calloway and Chief Williams had an arrangement, he explained. Officers were instructed to make arrests in certain neighborhoods before community events or elections. The cases would go to Calloway, who would ensure they were handled appropriately. As the day ended, Amara gathered with her clients outside the federal building. News cameras captured their determined faces. Ms. Johnson, how do you feel about today's hearing? A reporter called out. Amara considered her answer carefully. Today, the system worked as it should. People spoke truth to power, and that truth was heard. This isn't about one judge or one case. It's about ensuring our justice system truly provides equal protection under the law. In Washington, the president watched the interview on a monitor and turned to his chief of staff. "I want to meet her when this is over," he said. "People like Amara Johnson are exactly who we need to help rebuild trust in our institutions." 6 months after the investigation began, a bright autumn day dawned over Washington, D.C. Amara Johnson stood at the base of the Lincoln Memorial, taking the moment of quiet reflection before the day's ceremony. She wore a deep blue suit, her hair styled elegantly, looking every bit the accomplished attorney she was. So much had changed since that fateful day in Judge Calloway's courtroom. The Justice Department's investigation had uncovered a network of judicial corruption spanning 3 states. 5 judges, including Calloway, had been removed from the bench. Dozens of dismissed cases had been reopened and reviewed. "There you are," called a familiar voice. Michelle Washington approached, carrying 2 coffee cups. "Nervous about today?" Amara accepted the coffee with a smile. "A little. It's not every day you get invited to the White House." "You deserve this moment," Michelle assured her. "Your courage started something important." At 11 o'clock a.m. sharp, Amara stood in the Rose Garden alongside her clients and others who had fought against judicial corruption. The president approached the podium as cameras flashed. "Today, we celebrate a victory for equal justice under law," the president began. 6 months ago, an attorney named Amara Johnson stood her ground when faced with corruption and bias. Her actions sparked the largest judicial misconduct investigation in recent history. Amara listened, still amazed by how far things had come. She thought of Jason and Denise, both now working with the new court administration implementing reforms. She thought of Officer Wilson, who had risked his career to tell the truth. "The Judicial Fairness and Accountability Act I'm signing today will establish new oversight procedures and create an independent review process for judicial conduct complaints," the president continued. "This legislation ensures that what happened in Judge Calloway's courtroom cannot happen again." After the signing ceremony, the president approached Amara personally. "Ms. Johnson, your persistence reminds us that sometimes it takes one person standing firm to change an entire system." "Thank you, Mr. President," Amara replied. "But I wasn't alone. Many people fought this battle before me without the support I received. Which is why I'm pleased to announce your appointment to the new Judicial Review Commission," the president said. "We need your perspective to help rebuild trust in our courts." Later that afternoon, Amara returned to Westfield for a community celebration. The same church basement where she had met with her clients months before was now decorated with balloons and banners reading "Justice Prevails." Tanya Roberts embraced her as she entered. "We won, Ms. Johnson, not just our case, but something bigger." "Yes, we did," Amara agreed, looking around at the gathered faces. The original case against the Westfield Police Department had been settled for a record amount. More importantly, the department was now under a consent decree requiring comprehensive reforms in its practices. Marcus Washington approached with an envelope. "This is for you," he said, "from the community." Inside was a certificate announcing the creation of the Amara Johnson Legal Justice Scholarship, which would help local students attend law school. "We need more attorneys like you," Marcus explained. "People who won't back down." As evening fell, Amara stood at the podium addressing the room. "When I took our case, I never imagined where it would lead. I just knew that justice matters, for everyone, not just those with money or power." She looked at the faces before her, her clients, community members, young people considering legal careers, and even Officer Tanner, who had left the court to join the reform efforts. "Judge Calloway thought he could remove me from his courtroom and silence our cause. Instead, he learned a powerful lesson. True justice cannot be contained by courthouse walls or stopped by a single person's corruption." The room erupted in applause as Amara concluded her speech. Outside, the sun set on Westfield, a community forever changed by one attorney's refusal to be silenced and an unexpected call from the White House that had tipped the scales of justice back toward balance. The story of Amara Johnson and Judge Calloway will be taught in law schools for years to come, a reminder that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice when brave people help it along.